What if you were arrested for no reason, even as a senior Pentagon official? Have you ever imagined being arrested in a situation you never saw coming, even when you were a high-ranking official at the Pentagon? What would you do if, without explanation, you were treated like a criminal, not because of any wrongdoing, but because of the color of your skin and the job you hold? Ask yourself, could you stand your ground and fight for justice in a system designed to condemn you? Emily Davis' story will make you rethink justice, power, and racial bias. This isn't just about one woman's fight, it's about all of us, about the unexpected battles we may one day have to face. Don't miss this gripping case. Follow along to uncover the truth behind this intense legal showdown. If you believe in the power of justice, don't forget to subscribe and share this story. The night that changed everything. The police had no idea who they were dealing with. To them, Emily Davis was just another black woman behind the wheel of an expensive car. They didn't know she was a senior policy advisor at the Pentagon. They didn't realize that the person they were about to arrest held some of the highest security clearances in the country. It all started on a dark night as Emily drove home from an important policy meeting. She was pulled over by a patrol car. Officers Denton and Pratt thought it was just another routine stop, but they had no idea. Inside that car sat one of the most powerful figures in national security. At first, Emily was just confused. She felt the tension in the air, the sharp stares, the careful, calculated movements of the officers, the unnecessary questions, the suspicious glances. She had no idea why she was being stopped, but something felt off. She had never broken a law in her life, yet she could feel it. She was being treated like a threat. Her pulse quickened. She could sense what was coming. She had always followed the rules. She had always been cautious. Yet in that moment, she felt like she was being targeted, hunted, and cornered. Then it happened. They demanded to search her vehicle without consent. The situation escalated. Tension thickened. Her freedom was stripped away in an instant. Handcuffs, restraints, the feeling of being powerless in a system she had once trusted. How had it come to this? How had a woman who walked the halls of the Pentagon, who had shaped national policy, suddenly become just another suspect in the eyes of the law? Shock, disbelief, betrayal. The system she had defended was now the one that had turned against her. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. A fight for more than just herself. This case wasn't just about one traffic stop. This wasn't just about one arrest. With each court appearance, with every legal battle, Emily began to see the bigger picture. This wasn't about a misunderstanding. This was about power, race, and a system that needed to be held accountable. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been judged unfairly, for everyone who had been silenced, for everyone who had suffered injustice and had no voice to speak out. And she refused to back down. She stood her ground. She exposed the truth. And with every cross-examination, every witness statement, every moment in court, she refused to let injustice win. She knew this battle wasn't just hers to fight. It was a battle for all those who had been wronged before her and all those who would come after her. The verdict that shook the courtroom. As the final gavel fell, the courtroom fell silent. Emily stood tall, looking at the jury, the people who now held her fate in their hands. For the first time, she felt a connection to them, a shared understanding of what was at stake. Justice wasn't just about laws. It was about people. It was about fighting for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. And after everything, even after the trauma, the humiliation, the legal battles, Emily still believed. She believed that justice could win, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly. The path had been painful, but she had walked it with her head held high. Because justice doesn't come easily. You have to fight for it, and Emily Davis was never one to back down. A story that matters. This isn't just Emily's story. This is a story about all of us, about the moments when we face the unexpected, when we stand alone against an unfair system, when we have to fight for what we know is right. Justice isn't always given freely. Sometimes you have to demand it. And if there's one thing Emily's story proves, it's this. Justice doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to those who refuse to stay silent. Emily Davis, a senior Pentagon policy official, never imagined that an ordinary evening could change everything. After an intense battle with national security departments as she drove home, everything was about to turn upside down when flashing police lights appeared behind her. Anxiety surged within her, but she remained composed. This must be just a routine traffic stop, she thought automatically, trying to reassure herself. But as two officers approached, an unsettling feeling crept over her. With suspicious eyes and cryptic questions, they asked her to step out of the vehicle and searched her car without any reasonable justification. Their actions followed a predetermined plan. Emily felt like a pawn in a game she had no control over. The cold stares from the officers made her sense the injustice unfolding before her. Yet she remained steadfast, maintaining her composure. The officers demanded she exit the vehicle and even searched her belongings without her consent. At that moment, Emily realized this wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. It was a mix of misjudgment and ignorance. Despite asserting her position as a high-ranking Pentagon official, none of them seemed to acknowledge her. The feeling of being wrongly accused and misjudged wounded her pride deeply. She was arrested and dragged into a legal battle no one could have foreseen. From a respected woman in the military and government, Emily became a detainee in a case involving an armed robbery she had absolutely no connection to. Her faith in justice wavered, but deep down, a flicker of hope remained. The truth would come to light, and she would emerge victorious. But could Emily overcome the system and its injustices? Would her composure and courage be enough to sustain her through the legal battle ahead? Every passing moment was a test, and the biggest question loomed. Could Emily reclaim her rightful place in the light, or would she remain engulfed in darkness? That night, no one could have predicted that a routine encounter would alter Emily Davis's life forever. She was driving to Arlington, a peaceful town with quiet streets, to meet an old friend. The surroundings were serene, yet her mind was preoccupied with the intense discussions she had just had at the Pentagon. Lost in thought, she barely noticed the flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. Her heart pounded, not out of fear, but an uneasy sense of something about to unfold. Emily complied with every request from the officers. She pulled over, handed over her documents, and remained cooperative. She believed it was just a routine check. But as officers Alexander Green and Henry approached, the suspicion in their eyes made her uneasy. It wasn't fear of them, it was the irrationality of their actions that unsettled her. Why would they stop a lone woman driving legally with no violations? She couldn't understand. "Is there a problem?" Emily asked, trying to keep her voice steady. But her question was met with an ominous silence. The cold, piercing gazes of the two officers heightened her sense of unease. Her trust in the legal system, the very system she had spent years upholding, began to crack. Why was she being treated like a criminal when she had done nothing wrong? When one of the officers ordered her out of the car without providing a valid reason, her sense of helplessness intensified. She wanted to ask, was this a misunderstanding or an abuse of power? The situation escalated as they insisted on searching her car without her consent. A deep sense of disappointment took hold of her. How could these officers act this way when she had followed every rule? That night, it wasn't just about injustice, it was about the unexpected. Emily wasn't just stopped, she was arrested for reasons still unclear. A strong, respected woman in the military was now seen as a criminal in a baseless case. How could she accept this? As she was taken into custody, one lingering question remained in the air. Would she win this fight and reclaim her justice? The night's shocking events, though bitter, were only the beginning of a journey Emily Davis would never forget. After being arrested, Emily Davis felt as if the entire world had turned its back on her. A senior policy advisor at the Pentagon, she could hardly grasp the reality of being held overnight, trapped in a long, cold night filled with suspicion and judgment. Her hands were tightly cuffed, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and there was no one to visit or comfort her, only the distant murmur of voices in the hallway and the steady footsteps of officers passing by. A numbing helplessness spread through her, and with every passing moment, the weight of fear and regret grew heavier. She thought about her years of unwavering dedication, the critical strategies she had helped develop for the nation. But now all she had was the emptiness of four cold walls and a temporary holding cell. How had someone like her ended up being treated like a criminal? The questions swirled endlessly in her mind, but no answers ever came. She couldn't understand. Why didn't they believe her? Was it because of the color of her skin? Or was it simply the way they chose to see her? The entire situation felt like an unbearable weight pressing down on her, and every passing second in that cell made her feel dangerously close to giving up. There was no way out, no one to defend her, no one to prove her innocence. How had things escalated to this extreme? Had they been too quick to judge, too blinded by their own biases to seek the truth? Yet in the midst of all the doubt and injustice, Emily felt a faint glimmer of hope. Despite everything, she believed that someone, somewhere, would stand up for justice. Would it be those at the Pentagon, her colleagues, people she had dedicated herself to serving? Would they hear her silent cries in the darkness of this night? The answers to these questions were far from clear, but in the tension of the moment, on the brink of despair, Emily knew she had to hold on. She couldn't give up, not when everything was against her. To some, she was just another black woman, insignificant in their eyes, but she knew better. She was a woman of strength, of purpose, and she was determined to fight for the truth. In the darkness, she found a powerful connection within herself. She realized that strength didn't just come from power or position, it came from endurance, from the ability to stand firm when everything else crumbled. And she knew that if she could survive this night, she would emerge stronger than ever, proving to the world and to herself that justice could not be denied. In the cold, sterile interrogation room, Emily Davis sat in silence, her gaze locked onto the officers standing across from her. She could feel the crushing weight of suspicion pressing down on her, the barrage of questions and accusatory words firing at her like sharp blades cutting into her pride. How had she, a woman who had dedicated her life to serving her country, ended up being treated like a criminal? The tension in the room grew thicker with each passing moment. Emily knew that every word she spoke could be used as evidence against her. She had to remain calm, even as turmoil raged within her. Logic told her to keep proving her innocence, to believe that this ordeal would soon pass. But the overwhelming sense of dread refused to leave her mind. Why her? Why was this happening to someone who had devoted her entire life to justice and integrity? The officers continued applying pressure, trying to break her, trying to force a confession for something she had never done. But Emily knew that giving in would not only betray herself, but also everything she had stood for. She remained steadfast in her decision, though the fear gnawed at her relentlessly. Had those at the Pentagon realized what was happening to her? Did they know that a high-ranking official they had once trusted was now trapped in this spiral of suspicion? Then a thought crossed Emily's mind. She requested a phone call to contact her superior, Colonel McKnight, the one person who had always been her rock throughout her career. The air in the interrogation room grew even heavier as they hesitated. Would this call change everything? Could Colonel McKnight break the silence and prove who she truly was? Her anxiety surged as she heard the line connect. Then Colonel McKnight's voice came through, calm but tense. "Emily, I've confirmed your identity," he said. The moment those words echoed in the room, a shift in the atmosphere was palpable. It was the glimmer of hope she needed, the affirmation that the truth would ultimately prevail. But was it enough to turn the tide? Was it enough to dismantle the layers of bias and doubt stacked against her? Those questions swirled in her mind. But in that moment, Emily knew one thing for certain. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she would never let justice be destroyed. She would fight for the truth because that was the only way to restore faith in fairness and righteousness. After finally proving her innocence, Emily stood in the interrogation room, her eyes no longer flooded with worry and tension. The guilt and injustice she had endured over the past days had now dissolved, replaced by an overwhelming sense of relief. But even in this moment of vindication, her pain had not truly healed. The injustice she faced was not just the actions of one police officer. It was a reflection of an entire system that had refused to recognize her rights simply because of the color of her skin. Emily knew this was not just her fight. Standing before the reinforced glass in the empty room, she felt the weight of responsibility pressing upon her. Black women, women like her, faced injustice every day, overlooked by society and the legal system. They were the ones, innocent yet punished, who bore the burden of racial discrimination and bias. And now Emily could not allow these injustices to remain confined to her personal experience. When she decided to file a lawsuit against officers Alexander Green and Henry, it was not just about personal retribution. It came from a deep conviction that injustice could not be ignored. Because if she remained silent, if she did nothing, then who would stand up for those who would inevitably face the same fate? She no longer saw this battle as just her own. It was a fight for all those who had suffered, for those without power, without a voice in society, for those who had been pushed to the margins, cast as outsiders in the very world they lived in. Emily knew that justice would not come easily, but she was ready to fight. This was not just a legal battle, it was a movement, a stand for human rights. With unwavering determination in her eyes, Emily stepped forward toward the courthouse, her resolve unshaken. She knew that no obstacle would deter her, because within her was a force that no one could take away. Her unyielding faith in justice. And that faith was not just for herself, but for all those silenced by a system built on racial disparity. This lawsuit, no matter how many years it might take, would be a statement that one day all the injustices Emily and those like her had endured would finally be acknowledged. And while the courts would ultimately decide the case, Emily's actions would ignite a flame of change, a change the world so desperately needed. She fought not just for herself, but for a future where fairness and equality would no longer be denied to those who had been silenced and cast aside. As Emily stepped into the courtroom, she was no longer just a woman who had been wrongfully accused. She had become a symbol for all those who had ever been oppressed and discriminated against. The case she was fighting for was not just about her personal justice. It was a battle for human rights, for dignity, and for all those who had been cast aside by society simply because of their skin color. This was more than just a legal proceeding. It was a declaration that acts of racial discrimination would never be ignored. Every step Emily took was no longer just for herself, but for everyone who had been forced to live in the shadows of division. Even with the weight of irrefutable evidence and leaked messages on her side, the anxiety in Emily's heart did not subside. She was up against unimaginable forces, officers Green and Henry, men she once believed were there to protect the community, had instead become its greatest threat. The footage, the racist messages, the proof of their prejudice, it was all too shocking to comprehend. These pieces of evidence did more than expose the officers' discriminatory actions. They shattered the illusion of trust in the very system meant to uphold justice. The images, the damning texts, did not just reveal the corruption of two officers, but pulled back the curtain on the deep fractures within the legal system itself. Each video clip, each message made Emily's heart tighten. How could she trust a system that had allowed men like this to exist within its ranks? The very officers she had once viewed as protectors had revealed themselves as betrayers. But the harshest truth she had to face was the realization that justice never came easily, especially when those in power were the ones who had turned the system into a tool of division. With every damning piece of evidence presented, the tension in the courtroom became unbearable. Emily wasn't just fighting to clear her name. She was leading a greater battle, one that sought justice for all those who had been deemed unworthy. Every step forward became heavier, yet she could not stop. More than ever, Emily felt the weight of the responsibility she carried in this fight. The murmurs in the courtroom, the eyes of admiration from the community. They were no longer just personal recognition. They were symbols of a newfound hope for those who had been silenced and marginalized. In the end, as the evidence and testimonies unfolded, one pressing question echoed in the minds of everyone present. Is this system truly ready to change? Now that the racism, the blatant abuse of power had been exposed, would justice finally prevail? And if it did, would those who had suffered finally reclaim the rights and respect they had always deserved? With undeniable proof and unwavering determination, Emily was no longer just fighting for herself. She was choosing to fight for a fairer world. She knew this was only the beginning, but it was the strongest first step she could take. All eyes in the courtroom were fixed on Emily, from the reporters capturing every moment to the loved ones waiting anxiously. They all witnessed her endure one of the most harrowing battles of her life. The months of relentless pressure, the complexity of the legal fight, and the struggle for justice had all led to this defining moment. Justice had not only cleared Emily's name, but also rekindled hope that, one day, the flaws in this system would finally be addressed. But Emily didn't feel triumphant. What she carried wasn't the sensation of victory, but the heavy weight of a prolonged fight. She had endured too much: doubt, public scrutiny, and even betrayal from those she once trusted. Facing officers as powerful as Green and Henry, men she had once believed were guardians of justice, had made her feel as though the entire system had turned against her. The messages, the video footage, they didn't just expose wrongdoing, they illuminated the deep pain she had endured. As the verdict was announced, Emily didn't breathe a sigh of relief. Instead, she understood that this battle had never been just about her. It was for all those who had been silenced by systemic oppression. Her fight wasn't over, but at least justice had been served. She watched as officers Green and Henry faced the consequences of their actions. It was the punishment they deserved. But was it enough to change the deep-seated beliefs they held? Could they truly grasp that no amount of power could shield them from accountability? Justice had prevailed, not as an act of vengeance, but as a means to restore order and rebuild trust. Emily knew that winning or losing wasn't what mattered most. What truly mattered was ensuring that this system changed so that everyone could live in a more just society. From the tears shed throughout the trial to the sharp words spoken in court, everything had served a singular purpose. And that purpose wasn't just to clear Emily's name. It was to send a message to those in power that their actions would never go unchecked. As she stepped out of the courtroom, the blinding lights of the cameras no longer fazed her. She felt a shift in the air, a sense of relief, but also a profound connection to the people standing behind her. They weren't just supporters, they were the reason she had refused to back down. In that moment, Emily realized that justice wasn't just about winning a case. It was about the way she and others would continue to fight for a fairer society. This wasn't the end, it was a new beginning. And while the road ahead remained long, Emily now believed one undeniable truth: once you stand up for justice, the fight never truly ends. After the long battle, Emily stood at the courthouse doors, her heart still heavy with a whirlwind of emotions. She had just emerged from a fight that was not only for herself, but for those crushed by the system. Justice had prevailed, but Emily knew this was only a small chapter in her long journey. Many saw her as a symbol, a figure of courage and resilience, but she did not see herself that way. She was simply a woman determined to do what was right, no matter the challenges she faced. Returning to the Pentagon, Emily stepped into her familiar office with a newfound sense of purpose. The past days, filled with hardships, doubts, and intense legal battles, had transformed her. She was no longer just a senior advisor. She was a survivor, someone who had withstood immense pressure and oppression to continue the important work she had dedicated her life to. But had things truly changed? While justice had been served, Emily knew that the work she was doing at the Pentagon remained riddled with challenges. She was not only protecting national security, but also standing for the ethical principles she believed in. She had to make tough decisions, where often things were not as clear-cut as she wished them to be. The tense negotiations, the high-stakes discussions with top officials, all of it demanded that she hold on to her ideals with unwavering conviction. There was a time when she had lost faith in this system, when she had felt abandoned in a battle with no clear outcome. But today, standing strong, Emily felt a renewed sense of power. She was not alone. The allies, the colleagues who had supported her, were the reason she could keep fighting. Every day presented new challenges, but nothing could slow her down now. Had everything truly changed? Was the courtroom victory just a small milestone, or was it the beginning of a larger fight? The answers were not yet clear, but Emily believed she was on the right path. She believed in justice and in the change she could bring, not just for herself, but for all those the system had wounded and cast aside. Her work at the Pentagon was more than just a job. It was her mission. And while many obstacles lay ahead, Emily knew she had a clear purpose: to fight for a fairer society, one where no one was left behind, where no one was judged by prejudice and injustice. She would continue the fight because this was the work of her lifetime. Emily stood in her office, gazing out the window, feeling the silence settle around her after all the storms she had endured. A whirlwind of emotions filled her heart: joy at seeing justice prevail, sorrow when reflecting on the dark past, but above all, a newfound sense of hope. She had overcome unimaginable challenges, stood firm against pressure and prejudice, and emerged stronger than ever. She was not just the victor in her own battle. She had become a voice for those who could not speak for themselves. The experience had shaped her, making her stronger, but it also made her realize that the fight was never truly over. With the final verdict ensuring justice and holding the guilty accountable, Emily had been promoted. Yet this was not about status or power for her. She knew that holding justice in her hands was not just a personal triumph. It was a profound responsibility. This was her chance to implement real change, to ensure that injustices like the ones she faced would never happen again. She had become an inspiration to those who had suffered at the hands of a broken system, to those who had fought silent battles with no one to witness their pain. Now they had someone to look up to, a beacon of hope. But one question still echoed in her mind. Was it enough? Could she do more to bring real change? To create a world where justice was not just an ideal written in books, but a lived reality for all? Could she reform the entire system, or was she only winning isolated battles? These questions would never leave her, but Emily was undeterred. She understood that fighting for justice was never easy. It required sacrifice, the courage to face unimaginable obstacles, and above all, unwavering determination. And so, every day she pressed forward. She carried the hope that one day she wouldn't just win individual battles, but help build a fairer system. One where people lived without fear, where justice was not a privilege but a right. With unwavering resolve, Emily walked into her next meeting, her heart not just carrying hope, but a solemn promise. She would never abandon the ideals she had fought for. Emily Davis's story is a powerful reminder that justice is never easy, and sometimes to achieve it, we must face immense challenges, skepticism from those around us, and resistance from long-standing institutions. Yet the most important thing is to stand firm in one's principles and never back down in the face of injustice. The lesson from her story is the strength and courage of a woman who stood up for her rights and those of others. Emily's fight was not just for herself, but for a fairer society. The hardships and trials she faced only served to strengthen her, helping her uncover the resilience within her. She turned adversity into an opportunity to fight for greater values. This story also highlights the importance of transparency and accountability in the pursuit of justice. Regardless of power or status, one must stand up for truth and fairness. Ultimately, Emily's journey proves that when you fight with courage and hold steadfast to justice, truth will always prevail, and meaningful change will follow.